What's up, guys? MP Clem back with another episode of Around the NFLHC. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's get going with the episode. So we've got week 3 in the books, fully done. So we're going to get right into it, guys. Thursday night, the red-hot New Orleans Saints hosted the ice-cold Los Angeles Rams, and the Saints won 33-9. Now, typically this is a point where I would do top graded player and lowest graded player for each team, but last I checked, I think Friday or whatever it was, there weren't any listed, so we're gonna go and skip that part and talk just a little bit about the game. Saints were red hot, like I mentioned. They are on fire. They are passing the ball super well. They're running the ball more than they should probably. Defensively, they've looked really good so far, which is, for me, the big surprise. I didn't have many questions about their offense. I had a whole bunch of questions about their defense. So far, I'm really impressed with the defense and where they're going. Still not fully sold, especially after an injury they suffered this week, but I think so far, if you're in New Orleans, you're only happy. So we'll get into the next part. The Saints had an offensive line rating of 8.36 and allowed 2 sacks, while the Rams had an 8.31 grade and allowed 3. And New Orleans was 40% on third down. The Rams were 21%, which is a big difference in terms of efficiency. That shows to me is that the Rams were not able to either get manageable third downs frequently, or were unable to pick those up, obviously when they needed to. So when you're an offense or a team that's already 0-2 coming into this week and to only convert 21% of your third down attempts, that's usually not going to work in your favor. Penalties were pretty much even. Aaron Devereaux for the Saints was 30 of 44 for 333 yards, 3 touchdowns. Rookie wide receiver Mike Miller, who is having a great start to the season, definitely putting himself in the Offensive Rookie of the Year kind of race early on. 10 catches, 126 yards, and a touchdown. He finished above Sean Jenkins on the stat sheet, so that's always impressive to me. Then on the other side, outside linebacker Austin Olsen had 6 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1.5 sack, and a safety. Great game from him. I think he's kind of a key part, especially in the pass rushing department. The other side, you have Jameer Sample, or the guy they picked up out of LSU, whose name is escaping me. I want to say Alexander Davenport, but Alexander Burton, that's his name. Those two are kind of probably splitting reps there. A little inexperienced, a little under-talented compared to Austin Olsen. So Olsen's kind of have to carry a chunk of the load in the pass rushing area, and he's done that so far this season. For the Rams, quarterback Daryl Murphy was 16 of 28 for 206 yards. No turnovers is always good. Avoiding turnovers is always great, but your team needs points, and he wasn't able to do that for them. Murphy's had kind of a weird start to the season, not really good. Maybe this team's just kind of in a weird funk, and they've had a tough schedule. They've played the Saints, they've played, I think, the Browns and the Packers. That's a tough 3-game schedule to open the season on. They're in the worst division in the league, so there's still time to get it together and get some wins and make the playoffs. Rookie running back Davin Knox, who had a fantastic preseason, is having a pretty poor regular season. He had 10 carries for 37 yards and a touchdown. Defensive end Michael Bruce, 2 tackles, 2 sacks, so good game out of him. Saints are in one of the most competitive divisions in the league, the NFC South, so starting off 3-0. They're the only team in that division to be undefeated, so they're leading the division. I think they're right there in line for the number 1 seed very early on, but they're still having a great start to the season. And for the Rams, like I said, 0-3, not ideal way to start the season, but plenty of time to turn it around. So we'll move on to 1 p.m. There's a bunch of good games here. First were the 1-1 Cincinnati Bengals hosting the 2-0 Denver Broncos, and Cincinnati won 34-9. Top player for Cincinnati was quarterback Joel Keane, who is having a great start to the season and is certainly in the MVP discussion right now. He had a grade of 8.93. He was 30 of 40 for 409 yards and 3 touchdowns. Top player for Denver was defensive end Deontay Davis, who had a grade of 6.83. He had 2 tackles and then 1.5 sacks. Worst player for Cincinnati, outside linebacker Jermaine Dixon, who I think is 95 years old. He had a grade of 6.01. Worst player for Denver was, again, for the 3rd week in a row, defensive tackle Emmanuel Serrano. I think he's a second-year guy out of Stanford. He had a grade of 4.02. Serrano's been the worst performer each of their first 3 weeks for Denver, and I don't think he's made a stat sheet, either week. So it's hard to continue to play like that. See a guy struggling that much and not make a move or make a change. I just don't know that Denver has the tools or pieces on hand to make a change at that position right now. Cincinnati had an offensive line rating of 8.02 and gave up 4 sacks. Denver offensive line rating of 8.49 and gave up 2 sacks. Cincinnati was 44% conversions on 3rd down, while Denver was only 18. And that's again a huge difference, like we talked about in a Thursday night game where one team is doing very well on 3rd downs and is staying on the field, and the other team just can't do it, just can't stay on the field at all. Denver also had 9 penalties for 67 yards. It was twice the penalty yardage that Cincinnati had, so that doesn't help either. Another kind of top guys that showed up for Cincinnati, running back Ron Thomas, 13 carries, 104 yards, and a touchdown. He also had 2 receptions for 25 yards. Wide receiver Adrian Jankowski, 10 catches, 118 yards, and a touchdown. And then cornerbacks Blake Turner and Aaron Stiles each had 2 tackles and a pick. So great games out of them. Other top players or other players to talk about for Denver, quarterback Eric Jennings, who came in for the injured Todd Jennings early in the game, was 13 of 26 for 146 yards, no touchdowns, 2 picks. Defensive end Andrew Phillips, who I think is an injury replacement guy himself, continues to play well, 2 tackles and a sack. And then outside linebacker Joe Palmer, 6 tackles and a sack. This puts Denver at 2-1. I think they're a game, or they're tied with Las Vegas after this week, so they're still right there for the division, and it's still early. Eric Jennings struggled, kind of being thrown into the game, probably with very little preparation. So I think if you give him a couple weeks, he might rebound and play well. You still have a really good running back in J.B. Blacknall that you can rely on and give him lots of carries. That's probably the move I would make if I were you. So overall, great game for Cincinnati. I projected them to go 0-16, and they're already 2-1. So they're showing the league that if you guys didn't know that by now, I'm a goddamn moron. But Cincinnati's really proven that early on. Next game, the Baltimore Ravens, who are 2-0, hosted the 0-2 Arizona Cardinals. Baltimore won 16-3. Top player for Baltimore was running back Gabriel Shields. I think he's the 3rd string running back, but he's the 3rd down back. He had a grade of 7.82. He had 11 carries for 64 yards and a touchdown, so that's almost 6 yards a carry. That's fantastic. He's had a very good preseason and a good season so far, so that's a good little find by the Ravens franchise there. Top player for Arizona, wide receiver Ricky Chambers with a grade of 5.62. I think this is his 2nd time being the top player for Arizona while having a mid-5 grade. So it's just Arizona's having some tough sledding right now. He had 3 catches for 54 yards and a drop. Worst player for Baltimore, was kicker Dennis Scott with a grade of 4.0. He was 3-5 on field goals with misses from 50 and 40 yards. So, not a great game, but, you win by 13 anyway, so those 2 field goals don't really matter. Worst player for Arizona who can't catch a break with bad wide receiver play was Eugene Sanders with a grade of 2.45, 2 catches, 22 yards, and 2 drops. Baltimore with a pretty low offensive line grade of 7.93. Arizona 8.25, each allowed 4 sacks. Let's see. Nothing much here. Arizona had 83 penalty yards to Baltimore's 57. So you're an offense or a team that's struggling to score points or stop people from scoring points on you. Having lots of penalty yards doesn't help. Other people to mention for Baltimore, quarterback Brett Fisher, the Fish God himself, was 10 of 18 for 145 yards and a pick. He also had 32 rushing yards. Running back Musa Good was 20 carries for 108 yards. He did lose a fumble, however. Defensively, Tyrone Jones is a god amongst men and probably has put himself in the MVP discussion very early in the season. 6 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. I think Baltimore recovered both of those fumbles. So I think Tyrone Jones, getting to the quarterback twice and forcing 2 turnovers, that just goes to show how important Tyrone Jones is to this not just his defense, but this whole team, really, and how good of a player he really is. For Arizona, quarterback Paul Davenport continues to struggle. 14 of 30 for 170 yards, 2 picks, and a lost fumble. He also had 39 rushing yards. Rookie running back Trevin Yeldon continues to struggle himself. 14 carries for 52 yards and a fumble lost. Defensive end Josiah Harden, 3 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Great game for him. Unfortunately, he's just 1 out of 22 starters, so he's not able to play offense either. There were 6 turnovers in this game, 4 by Arizona, 2 by Baltimore. So really sloppy game. The defenses really came to play. A great win for Baltimore. They needed to win. Their division is really, really tough right now. Arizona, actually, I think at 0-3, I think I read earlier in the shot box, they are technically leading the division since they don't have a loss in conference, and that's one on the tiebreaker. So right now, the 0-3 Arizona Cardinals are the 4th seed in the NFC. So I don't want to hear how bad the AFC is ever again. Moving on to a game that I'm very, very happy to bring to you and talk about. I don't want to talk about too much because I'm sure you will start tuning out. My 0-2 Indianapolis Colts hosted the 2-0 Philadelphia Eagles and came away with a 27-24 overtime victory. Speaking personally as the owner of the Colts, it was a win we really needed. Our division is off to a really good start, and we were having absolutely the worst time of everybody, so we needed this win. And Philly's a really good team who is kind of struggling a little bit offensively, has kind of skated by, but we were able to kind of get that game into overtime and win the game. Top player for the Colts, quarterback Aaron Shea, 39 of 55 for 379 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. He had an overall grade of 8.21. I don't know what else they want him to do. Maybe the pick dropped his grade down a little too far, but I mean, we don't win this game without him playing hero ball. For Philly, rookie free safety Cameron Bowden, grade of 6.83. He had 3 tackles, a pick, and a pass defended. Worst player for the Colts, outside linebacker Quasi Robb with a grade of 5.01. So not the worst grade to have. If your lowest grade is over 5, I think you're going to be kind of okay with that. Worst player for Philly was, again, for their 3rd game in a row, center Tim Kearns with a grade of 3.85. Again, another situation where we have a guy who is consistently your worst player. At what point do you consider making a change? And I think Philly has someone behind him who's closely rated to him. Maybe it's worth a try to give that guy, a chance and see what he can do. Because Tim Kearns has an average grade of 4.1, and that's not good. I think your offense really needs a good offensive line, and for your worst player to be on that offensive line is not great for you. The Colts offensive line had a grade of 8.41 and allowed 2 sacks. Philly had a rating of 8.2 and allowed 5 sacks. So first game all season where the Colts won the sack battle. Third downs were pretty much even. Penalties were fairly even. Philly had 60 penalty yards. Colts had 31. So that does make a difference. Other players for Indianapolis: wide receiver Mosey Bartos, 13 catches, 136 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Great game out of him. Love to see when he performs well. Defensive tackle Hudson Adam, 3 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. And then defensive end Anthony Miller, 3 tackles, a tackle for a loss, and 2 sacks himself. For Philly, quarterback Alan Taylor was 18 of 32 for 190 yards and a touchdown. He also had 19 rushing yards. Running back, Marshawn Miller, kind of a poor game, 16 carries for 51 yards and a touchdown. Did get in the end zone, but barely got over 3 yards a carry. And the defensive end, Ulysses Smith, my Moby Dick in a sense, I guess. Maybe I'm interpreting that incorrectly. I don't know. Either way, I don't really like talking about him. 3 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack. Other game notes: Colts had 8 total rushing attempts. I think we averaged around 4.8 yards per carry, so I'll kind of take that with how poor our rushing game has been at times. Philly did outscore the Colts 14-0 in the second half, I believe. I wrote down second Q, but I think it's second half, and that helped force overtime. So, like my real-life Colts, not a great second half team apparently, but we did get the job done in overtime, unlike my real-life Colts. So we'll move on to a divisional opponent for both those teams. The 2-0 Jacksonville Jaguars hosting the 1-1 New York Giants, and the Jags win 31-13. Top player for Jacksonville, quarterback Taylor Rodriguez, who I felt has kind of not been great in the first couple of games, but really came to play. He had a grade of 8.51. He was 27 of 40 for 364 yards and 2 touchdowns. Top player for the Giants was running back O.J. Carano, with a grade of 7.85, 17 carries for 101 yards. Pretty good game out of him. Worst player for Jacksonville, outside linebacker Donnie Pavaro, grade of 5.01. He had 5 tackles and a pass defended. Worst player for New York Giants, cornerback, T.J. Hunter, with a grade of 3.11. He had 3 tackles and 2 passes defended. And those stats don't make it sound like he had a bad game, but I think he went up against Raheem Robinson, and we'll talk about the game Raheem Robinson had a little bit later. Jags had an offensive line rating of 8.42 and allowed 1 sack. The Giants had a line rating of 8.3 and allowed 2 sacks. Let's see, anything else? Jacksonville converted 45% of their third downs, the Giants only 30%. So even the Giants, who had a pretty good rushing game, weren't able to convert a high rate of third down. So that tells me the Jacksonville defense really came to play there and did well. Other players for Jacksonville, running back Asante Sowell, who had a kind of a mild injury. Who he's not out, but he's probable, so he will probably play most likely next week against the Colts, but small possibility he doesn't. I think he missed parts of this game. He had 15 carries for 70 yards and a touchdown. Wide receiver Raheem Robinson, 9 catches, 150 yards and a touchdown. So now I guess we can kind of see why T.J. Hunter had such a low grade. Defensive end Ron Rice, 4 tackles, a tackle for a loss and a sack. And then for the Giants, quarterback Will Thompson, with the ancient backfield here for the Giants. Thompson was 16 of 29 for 190 yards and a pick. Defensive end Curtis Lewis, 2 tackles, tackle for a loss and a sack. And then outside linebacker Lewis Peterson, 5 tackles and 2 tackles for a loss. Jacksonville with a good win. Kind of needed to win this game to stick with the not stick with. I think they're now ahead of the Tennessee Titans, kind of spoiling it a little bit. But the Titans and Jags came in both 2-0, so they needed to win. You know, the Giants, you're not competing for anything this year. You're just trying to see what you have and see if you can spoil other teams' seasons, and you weren't able to do that this week. Other note, Jacksonville had a punting average of 48.4 yards, and that's obscene. So we'll move on to the next game. The 1-1 Tampa Bay Buccaneers hosting the 1-1 Las Vegas Raiders, and the Raiders won big, 38-21. The Buccaneers keep getting injury issues and weird stuff happening, and it's just not going well for them right now. Top player for the Bucs, free safety Aaron Blakely, had a grade of 7.01, and he had 3 tackles. Top player for the Raiders, quarterback Nick Hall. That's a surprise, right? Nick Hall playing well. He had a score of 9.37, a grade of 9.37. He was 27 of 33 for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's close to a perfect quarterback rating if it isn't. Just a magnificent game from Hall. Worst player for the Bucs is third time in a row, strong safety Dwayne Tatum with a grade of 2.94. I think his overall average is like 3.3. So he's really, really struggling this year. I think Kevin DeWin comes back either week 4 or week 5, and I think this Buccaneers defense will get a lot better as soon as he comes back. Worst player for the Raiders, outside linebacker Sergio Miller with a grade of 4.5. Neither of the worst performers for either team made a stat sheet. Offensive lines were pretty much even. Tampa Bay had a rating of 8.23, and the Raiders 8.27. Only 1 sack for each team, so pretty much even. No real advantage there. Tampa Bay had 33% conversion rate on third down. The Raiders were 44%. So that's just, again, more efficiency. It's fewer times facing third downs, which means they're getting first downs on second downs and first downs more often. So that just shows that the Raiders' offense was a little bit more efficient today or this week. Now, the Raiders did have double the penalty yardage of the Buccaneers, but it didn't really matter in this game. Other players for the Bucs, quarterback Taylor Hayden, 20 of 27 for 244 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. He also had a rushing touchdown. Defensive end Darius Hayes, 4 tackles and a sack. And then defensive tackle Frank Williams, 4 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. For the Raiders, running back Major Morris, he had 21 carries for 108 yards and a touchdown. Wide receiver Lamont Crawford, playing for the injured Malcolm Davis, had 10 catches for 140 yards and a touchdown. I'm guessing that he was the one targeting Tatum all game. Cornerback Mike Gradishar, 2 tackles, pass defended, forced fumble, and a fumble recovered. Good game from him. Other things of note, Tampa Bay wide receiver Richard Wilson had a fumble, which he lost, which is probably where Grady got his fumble from. And Las Vegas returned a punt for a touchdown. I think that's the second time this year that Tampa Bay has allowed a punt return for a touchdown. I think they had that issue last year as well. So I don't know if it's necessarily your punter or if it's your punt coverage unit, but something just isn't working right with your special teams units. And we'll move on to the last game of the 1 p.m. slot. The Washington football team, who's 1-1, hosting the 0-2 Seattle Seahawks, and Washington won 17-10. Seattle had given up like 42 and 35 points in the previous 2 games, giving up 38 points, 39 points a game, and Washington only scored 17. So either Seattle's defense got better all of a sudden, or Washington's offense is just in a weird spot, and I think it's the Washington offense is just in a weird spot right now. Top player for Washington, running back Ricardo Reed. That should tell you that something weird is going on with Washington's offense when he's playing well. That's usually a good sign that something odd is off with the offense there. He had a grade of 8.16. He had 20 carries and 104 yards. Great game for someone like Ricardo Reed. Top player for Seattle, outside linebacker Christian Little with a grade of 6.63. 5 tackles and a tackle for a loss. Worst player for Washington, outside linebacker Anthony Brown with a grade of 5.31. He had 5 tackles on the game. Worst player for Seattle, offensive tackle James Poindexter with a grade of 4.0. Washington, had a offensive line rating of 8.6 and did not give up a sack. Seattle had an offensive line rating of 8.34 and gave up a sack themselves. Third down conversions, neither team was very good. Washington was 33%, Seattle 23%. However, Washington faced 4 fewer third downs, which probably helps explain why they ended up winning, scoring to 7 more points. Quarterback Tanner Bowman for Washington was 24 of 32 for 290 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Okay, it continues to get weird for Washington. Ricardo Reed goes for over 100 yards. Tanner Bowman goes for almost 300 yards, and he only managed 17 points. Something is just not quite clicking for you guys right now. Tight end Tony DeMarco, 9 catches, 108 yards, and a drop. Cornerback Tre'Davious Dykes, the rookie, 2 tackles, a pick, and a pass defended. For Seattle, quarterback Jairus Jones, 22 of 33, 240 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. It was all pretty good up until the interception part, but I mean, if Jairus Jones can continue to complete 67% of his passes, and if he can throw more touchdowns and picks, maybe he has a job next year. Who knows? Defensive end Brian Glenn had 3 tackles and a pick. Cornerback John Queen, 3 tackles and a pass defended. So Washington at 2-1, I think, shares a 3-way tie for the lead in the NFC East. Seattle at 0-3. Like I mentioned, Arizona is probably, I think it was what was said. I don't know if it's 100% true, but the common thought right now is that Arizona leads the NFC West at 0-3. It's incredible to me. Okay, move on to 4 p.m. First game were the 0-2 Chicago Bears hosting the 2-0 Miami Dolphins and falling 27-16. Top player for the Bears was free safety Alan Namath with a grade of 9.53. He had 4 tackles, 2 picks, and a pass defended. Anytime you get 2 picks off of Brian Brown, you're doing something right. Top player for Miami, inside linebacker Philip Moore. He had a grade of 9.64. He had 4 tackles and 3 passes defended. So good game out of him. For a linebacker to get 3 passes defended probably means Chicago was trying to get the ball to, I forgot who the tight end is, and it's going to bug me because I know it. I've read it. It's not David Gaines. He's a wide receiver. Whoever the tight end is, he's a good tight end, and they like to target him. Probably means that he was being targeted heavily in the offense, and Philip Moore came up big and defended him well. Worst player for Chicago, cornerback Jabari Branch with a grade of 4.32. And for Miami, punter A.J. McKinney with a grade of 4.83. McKinney had a punting average of 40.6. I didn't see any punt returns listed for touchdowns for Chicago, so I'm assuming that the 40.6 was just bad punting for his normal self, hence the grade under 5. But again, if your punter is your worst performer, you're probably not too concerned with that. Chicago had an offensive line rating of 8 and gave up just 1 sack. Miami had an offensive line rating of 8.31 and gave up 2 sacks. Both teams were in the 20% range, 25% range for third down conversions. Miami had 85 penalty yards for Chicago's 32. Of course, didn't matter, but still quite a discrepancy there. Other players for Chicago. Quarterback Mohamed Foster, 15 of 25 for 208 yards, a touchdown, and 2 picks. He also had 46 rushing yards. Other guys include running back Vaughn Abraham. He had 19 carries for 68 yards, so a little bit better. That puts him at about almost a 4.0 yard per carry, so not great, but at least he's getting close to 70 yards right now. So that's better than week 1, of course. And then on the other side of the ball, inside linebacker Akil Morris had 5 tackles, a tackle for a loss, and a sack. Then for Miami, quarterback Brian Brown was 20 of 37 for 280 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. Of course, both picks went to Alan Namath. So Alan Namath was directly responsible for at least 3 Brian Browning completions, so give that man a trophy or a statue or something. Running back Marcus Berry had a good game, 20 carries for 109 yards and a touchdown. Defensive end Dexter Flowers had 3 tackles, a tackle for a loss, and a sack. Other notes, in the first half, Chicago led 13-6, but then Miami came alive in the second half, outscored them 21-3 to win 27-16. We'll move on .org to the next game. The 0-2 Kansas City Chiefs hosting the 0-2 New England Patriots, and the Chiefs won 24-13. Top player for Kansas City was running back Terrence Rogers with a grade of 8.71. He had 19 carries for 104 yards and a touchdown. He also had 37 receiving yards, not passing yards, receiving yards. Top player for New England, rookie outside linebacker Philip Davenport with a grade of 8.08, 5 tackles and a sack. Davenport, I think I've mentioned every week so far, he's had a pretty good start to the season and keeps making plays. He's a young talent that this defense really, really needs. Unfortunately, wasn't quite enough today, but he continues to get better, and I think he'll be a good little player for New England for quite a while. Worst player for Kansas City, free safety Rob Hamilton, grade of 4.01. Worst player for the Patriots, strong safety Norris Nolan, grade of 4.21. KC had an offensive line rating of 8.33. They gave up 2 sacks. New England offensive line rating of 8.44 and gave up a sack. Kansas City was 40% on third downs. New England was only 23%, so that's just a big difference here that you can't sometimes overcome. Another big difference here is penalty yards. Kansas City had 26. New England had 75. That could be something where you're New England, you're already struggling on third downs, and you're 3rd and 3, you have a false start. You get a 3rd and short and turn it into a 3rd and long. So that's kind of things that New England was kind of facing all day long. Just couldn't quite get out of their own way. Top players for Kansas City, other than the top players I already mentioned. Quarterback Ryan Harris was 23 of 34 for 281 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's kind of had a good couple games, not great games to start off the season, but this was his, I think, first game without a turnover, which is huge, and his team gets a victory. So that's a big key for Kansas City going forward is if Ryan Harris can avoid the interceptions. Tight end Spec Davidson. Remember Spec Davidson, guys? He had 7 catches for 99 yards and a touchdown. Cornerback Teddy Walker, 2 tackles and a pick. Hopefully, Teddy Walker, I think for a little bit was considered a bust of sorts. He was taking top 5, and he kind of didn't really do a whole lot. And hopefully he starts to get better and it kind of sheds that bust status and he can become a real valuable member of this team. Other guys for New England, quarterback Reggie Watkins was 20 of 38 for 231 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Okay game, not nearly the efficiency that we're used to seeing out of Reggie Watkins. You'd like to see his completion percentage closer to the 60%, 65% range. This week he was just barely above 50, and that's just not going to get it done. This New England team is just not good enough to weather poor games from Reggie Watkins. Defensive end, Mark Craig, 6 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. And then I think his outside linebacker, Peter Williams, had 4 tackles and a tackle for loss. After 3 quarters, this game was 10-10. And then Kansas City turned it on in the 4th quarter and outscored them 14-3. I think a large part of that was probably Ryan Harris showing up and kind of that clutch gene, if he has it, probably came out. So a good game from him, a good game from Kansas City. They kind of needed a win. I know it's still early in the season. I keep saying teams need wins, or they kind of needed that, but some teams do. And I think Kansas City was one of those that kind of needed a win early. Move on to our next game. The 0-2 49ers hosting the 2-0 Browns, and Cleveland won 34-10. Have had a really, really good start to the season so far. I think they've played 2 NFC West teams, though, so I don't know, if that's a 3-0 was a mirage, or if they really are just a good team who just happen to have a weak schedule. And I'm hoping for the Browns' sake as a former GM, that they're a good team who just happen to have a weak schedule. Top player for San Francisco, inside linebacker Delray Smart with a grade of 7.71. No matter how bad it gets for San Francisco, at least you've got Delray Smart in the middle of your defense. He had 7 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. Top player for Cleveland, free safety Martin Hernandez, grade of 8.05. 3 tackles, a pick, and a pass defended. Worst player for San Francisco, one of the worst overall rated players this week. Quarterback Philip Ray had a grade of 2.75. He went 10 of 23 for 104 yards and 3 interceptions. So at least he got 100 yards this game. I think last week he had 58. So that's something. And for Cleveland, it was Antonio Oliver, the strong safety, had a grade of 5.02. So, like I've mentioned a few times over the past couple weeks, if you have your worst players graded over 5, you're probably going to be okay with that. San Francisco had an offensive line rating of 8.25 and gave up a sack. Cleveland rating of 8.5 and gave up a sack themselves. Neither team was really good on third downs, but San Francisco was god-awful, going 2 for 12, which is basically 17%. Cleveland was 3 of 10 for 30%, so that's not a huge difference maker in the game, but good God, is San Francisco's offense bad. Other guys of note for the 49ers, running back Troy McCray, 16 carries for 40 yards and a touchdown. Defensive tackle Michael McBride had 5 tackles and half a sack, and the rookie defensive end Parker Holmes had 3 tackles and half a sack. So he's had a pretty good start to the season, Parker Holmes. So if you're San Francisco, you can hang your hat on that you have Delray Smart in your defense, and you have a good young defensive end in Parker Holmes too. So at least you've got that going for you. Other guys for Cleveland, quarterback Ryan Clark, 18 of 29 for 222 yards and 2 touchdowns. Really good game out of him. Running back Sean Bell, 21 carries for 129 yards, 2 touchdowns. Fantastic game for him. That's over 6 yards a carry. And defensively, defensive end Gabriel Beauchamp had 4 tackles, a tackle for a loss, and a sack. So I think now we've gone through all the AFC North. Oh, we haven't gone through all the AFC North, but we've gone through most of it. Their overall record through 3 weeks is 11-1, and this is a division that we've kind of all shat on in the past for being bad and mediocre, for good reason, because it kind of happened. But they're off to a great start, and we have to recognize that. It may not be against the best competition in the league, and then they come down to earth a little bit once they get into the meat of their schedules as a division. But so far, they've risen to the challenge, and they've just crushed their competition, I should say. And they're 11-1, so shout out to the AFC North for right now proving all the haters wrong. Next, 0-2 Chargers facing the 0-2 Panthers at home. Carolina won 24-20, a win that they kind of needed. Top player for the Chargers, tight end Scott Howard with a grade of 9.05, and it's just going to happen to Carolina unless they make a trade for an outside linebacker, and I don't know who's got one for a trade or who wants to give them one, but they're going to get eaten alive by tight ends. Scott Howard had 10 catches for 119 yards and a touchdown. Top player for Carolina was quarterback Christian Skaggs, who had a grade of 8.7. He was 23 of 32 for 261 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Worst player for the Chargers was tackle/guard Justin Way with a grade of 3.89. Worst player for Carolina, outside linebacker Leland Anderson, grade of 4.39. The Chargers' offensive line was bad again. They gave up 4 sacks and had an offensive line rating of 8.09. Carolina's offensive line was a little bit better, having a rating of 8.25 and giving up only 2 sacks. Let's see. Third downs, kind of even. Carolina 4 of 10 for 40%. The Chargers 3 of 12 for 25%. So the percentages look lopsided. And I've kind of been doing that all podcast long, just showing you percentages, because I think it is important. But in this game, it's a matter of Carolina converting 1 more third down attempt and having just 2 fewer, which, in a 4-point game can make a difference. If you're able to stay in the field a little bit longer, like Carolina, maybe get a field goal here and there or get a touchdown that the Chargers offense wasn't able to get because they couldn't convert that third down like you did. So other guys for the Chargers, quarterback Matty Swift, 32 of 50 for 371 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. That's not horrible. It's not great. Not great, but it's not the bad Matty Swift we've kind of been used to. Again, 50 attempts for Matty Swift is a lot, but right now the Chargers' running game is virtually non-existent. So I understand. Trust me. Wide receiver ML Crevault had 6 catches for 112 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Outside linebacker Shane Easley had 4 tackles, a tackle for a loss, and a sack. For Carolina, running back Mike Latta, another good game. He's had a pretty good season so far. 22 carries, 108 yards, and a touchdown. Cornerback Nate Tenzai, 3 tackles and a pick. And defensive end Demarius Strong, 2 tackles, a tackle for a loss, and 2 sacks. So Carolina has a division with New Orleans, who's probably the main competition for a division title. And New Orleans is red hot, so Carolina needed a win here. So it's good for them for getting that win that they kind of really needed. Next game, 2-0 Dallas Cowboys hosting the 0-2 Detroit Lions. And Detroit Lions took it behind the woodshed and executed them. Detroit won 42-21. Now, the top player for Dallas was defensive end Joseph Randolph, who had a grade of 7.82. 3 tackles, a tackle for a loss, and a sack for him. Top player for Detroit was cornerback Keyshawn Thompson with a grade of 8.88. He had 2 tackles and a pick. Worst player for Dallas, outside linebacker Adam Taylor, had a grade of 4.39. Strong safety Willard McCready, grade of 5.25. The Dallas offensive line had a rating of 8.67. Gave up 2 sacks. Detroit 8.42 and gave up 2 sacks. So both offensive lines came to play and had good games. And both teams were actually really efficient on third downs. Detroit was 6 of 13, which is 46%. Detroit was 6 of 11 for 55%. So that's 2 fewer third downs and 21 more points. What I'm guessing is Detroit probably did better on second downs and just faced a couple fewer third downs that Dallas was forced to face. So that probably isn't the difference in 2 third down attempts probably isn't the difference in 21 points, but it does matter. So other players for Dallas, quarterback Graham Burnett, 22 of 36 for 238 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. It's not a bad game. 22 of 36, that's what? Right around 60% probably completion percentage. The running game still hasn't quite gotten off the ground. Running back Adrian Robinson had 16 carries for 62 yards. That's just under 4 yards a carry. That's clearly not what Dallas is used to. They're used to a much more efficient running game, which I imagine would have kept Detroit's offense off the field and probably wouldn't have given up 42 points. Quarterback Travis Chapman, 2 tackles and 2 passes defended. For Detroit, quarterback Rob LeCount, these wins. There's one win for Detroit so far. He was 25 of 41 for 303 yards and 2 touchdowns. So just great game out of him. Running back Kenyon Randall had 20 carries for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's had a really good start to the season, and I think he and Mike Miller are probably leading the Offensive Rookie of the Year discussion right now. Defensive end Doug Carolyn, 4 tackles and a sack, so another good game from him as well. So we move on to the last game of the 4 p.m. slot. The 1-1 Falcons hosting the 1-1 Vikings, and the Atlanta Falcons and Donald Culver get the win, 23-17. And Atlanta's best player was not Donald Culver. He had a good game, but it was kicker Gino Giovanni. Oh, Jesus, I think that's how it's pronounced. Was he Italian or some shit? He had a grade of 9.41. He was 3 of 3 on field goals, 1 from 57 yards, 1 from 52 yards, and 1 from 26 yards. Top player for Minnesota was wide receiver Ja'Cory Kessler. Kind of had a weird kind of collegiate career that kind of led to a weird kind of beginning to a pro career for him, but good to see him playing well. He had a grade of 8.25. He had 7 catches, 56 yards, and a touchdown. For Atlanta, strong safety Mario Ruff was their worst player. He had a grade of 4.64. For Minnesota, running back Evan Grant was their worst guy. Grade of 4.31. He had 15 carries for 41 yards. So he's really struggled early on. Hopefully he gets better. I think he's going to be a solid, not great, but solid player maybe in the pros. So maybe he just starts getting closer to 4 yards per carry, 4.5 yards per carry that you kind of need him to get probably. Atlanta's offensive line came to play, 8.4 rating and no sacks allowed. Minnesota rating of 8.19 and allowed 2 sacks. Both teams were pretty much even on third downs, and penalty yards was in Atlanta's favor, having only 33 yards to Minnesota's 64 yards. So other players for Atlanta, I've mentioned his name a couple of times now. Rookie quarterback Donald Culver in his first start gets the win. He was 17 of 32 for 204 yards and a touchdown. Maybe not the most efficient game out of a quarterback, but that's over 7 yards an attempt. There's no turnovers, and most importantly, there's a win. Running back Akili Wallace gave him a lot of help. He had 19 carries for 108 yards and a touchdown. And defensive end Early Davis did his part, getting 3 tackles and a sack. So other players for Minnesota, quarterback Brian Verdell, 22 of 40, 208 yards and 2 touchdowns. So again, not the most efficient day out of the quarterbacks, but neither quarterback had a turnover, which is huge for these teams. Inside linebacker Cleveland Merrill for Minnesota had 8 tackles and a tackle for a loss. I included cornerback Devin Drummond because I think this is a mistake, but he says he had 4 tackles and a touchdown, but there's no way he had a touchdown. He didn't have a turnover or anything like that. I think that's just a typo, but I included him because he had 4 tackles anyways. So good win for Atlanta. They're now second. Yeah, they're second because Tampa Bay and Carolina are both 1-2. So they're second in the NFC South. So they're right there, 1 game out. So, a couple weeks now, they could be leading the NFC South. So move on to Sunday Night Football and kind of a weird game. The 0-2 Jets host the 1-1 Packers and lost 30-24 in overtime. The Jets' top player was free safety Rashad Jenkins, who I think they are absolutely in love with and have been pretty much since they drafted him. He had a grade of 8.94. He had 5 tackles, a pick, and 8 pass defended. Top player for the Packers, getting their quarterback some help, running back Jazz Durant. Had a grade of 8.61, 17 carries for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. The worst player for New York Jets was offensive tackle Joel Snow with a grade of 5.21. Worst player for Green Bay, wow, this is astonishing. Inside linebacker Jamal Harley with a grade of 6.02. Now, if you remember Arizona's, the Cardinals' high grade, it was Ricky Chambers. It was about 5.6, whereas Green Bay's worst player was a 6.02. So really, really well-played game. Both teams really showed up. It shows up in the offensive line ratings. The Jets 8.5, Packers 8.52. 1 sack allowed each team. They were very even on third downs. Penalty yards was pretty close. So these teams played evenly, and that's why it went to overtime. Unfortunately, the Jets just couldn't get on the right side of that overtime. Top player for the Jets, quarterback Eric Wegert. Excuse me if that came out sounding weird. He was 23 of 42 for 260 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. The maybe disgruntled, maybe had some family issues, maybe had a slight injury he was dealing with. Paul Howell had 6 catches for 74 yards and a touchdown. And defensive end Javier Davenport, 2 tackles and a sack. Quarterback Jason Johnson for the winning Packers, 24 of 36 for 308 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. So he's a little bit better than Wiegert in this game, and it shows in the final score. Wide receiver Dan Namalini, 8 catches, 102 yards, a touchdown, but a drop. And then free safety James White, 4 tackles and a pick. Packers still lead the NFC North. The Bears are 0-3. The Lions and the Vikings are 1-2, so they've got a 1-game lead. I still think they're definitely the best team in that division. So this is a good win for them to get on the road at New York Jets, and Jets probably a little desperate early in the season to get a win and just get on the right foot. And if you're the Jets, it sucks. It really does. There's no way about it. But like I've said before already, it's still early. There's still plenty of time. Your division is Miami, Buffalo, and New England. New England's probably not much of a threat. Buffalo might be. It depends on how Matt Jones continues to perform. And then you've got some guys in the AFC South and the AFC North now all of a sudden. So it is going to be a tough climb back to playoff spot, but if there isn't a franchise and a team that I trust to kind of get there and make moves to get back into playoffs, it's the Jets. So I'm not, if I'm the Jets, I'm not quite in panic mode. I'm definitely in let's win week 4 or week 5 games. I don't know if they have a bye week or not, but let's win our next game and let's just get the ball rolling in the right direction at least next week. We'll move on to their division rival, the Buffalo Bills, in Monday Night Football. Bills were 2-0 coming in, and they were hosting the 1-1 Texans, and Houston won 26-23. Top player for Buffalo, free safety Sammy Gray, grade of 8.36. He had 6 tackles, a pick, and a pass defended. Top player for the Texans, defensive tackle Bob Ballard, the free agent signing, had a grade of 8.5, 3 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks. Early on, definitely earning his contract for the Texans. Worst player for the Bills, strong safety Kevin Briggs with a grade of 2.17. I think that's the lowest grade we had all week. Worst player for the Texans, outside linebacker Ahmed London with a grade of 3.42. Buffalo's offensive line had a rating of 8.2 and gave up 3 sacks. The Texans' offensive line had a rating of 8.31 and gave up 2 sacks. Both teams were pretty bad, both under 40% on third downs, and the Texans had about twice as many penalty yards. Quarterback Matt Jones, who got a little dinged up in this game, but I don't think he's anything too serious. He was 19 of 28 for 189 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Wide receiver Gary Faneca Sr. had 7 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. Defensive end Anthony Ortiz, 3 tackles, 2 tackles for a loss, and a sack. Other players for the Texans, quarterback Alex LaShore, 23 of 34, 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Kind of getting better from week 2 performance, which was bad. It was just kind of bad. Defensive end Robert Fulton, 5 tackles and a sack. And then cornerback, I keep wanting to call cornerbacks quarterbacks for some reason, guys. Tom Wyman, 4 tackles and a pick. Only other note I have written is the word or phrase pipe gods. I think the Bills had 3 guys get hurt, and I think the Texans had 2 guys get hurt, or vice versa. Either way, 5 guys were listed as injured after this game. Excuse me. I think only 2 are going to miss any real time, which is fortunate, but they're kind of important players for those teams. So we'll move on to the next section. I don't know if these 2 teams noticed that that they got skipped over in their section, but I think this was Lucas who suggested this section. So everyone give a shout out to Lucas for this. But he thought of a game of the week where kind of talk about maybe one game that had a big impact on either the playoff race or was just kind of an important game. And I chose the 2-0 Pittsburgh Steelers hosting the 2-0 Tennessee Titans. I think in the, timestamps, which I fully intend to do this time, I'll include who the 2 teams are in this game. So if those 2 franchises go to I think this was a 4 p.m. slot or 1 p.m. I don't remember. Go to their original time slot and try and look for their game, and it's not there. They don't get worried that I just skipped them. they can at least go to their game of the week part. But as I mentioned, both teams were 2-0 coming in, and the Steelers won a big game at home, 34-28 over the Titans. Pittsburgh's top player was defensive end Carlos Washington, who I think had the highest grade this week at a 9.44. This guy's incredible. 4 tackles, 3 tackles for a loss, and 2.5 sacks. Just insane. For Tennessee, top player was wide receiver Greg Newman. He had a grade of 7.31. He had 8 catches for 101 yards and a touchdown. Worst player for Pittsburgh, offensive tackle Giovanni Garrison, who ended up getting hurt and is going to miss a couple weeks. He had a grade of 4.08. Tommy Furry had a grade of 4.56. He had 4 catches for 33 yards and a drop. Pittsburgh's offensive line had a rating of 8.09. They allowed 4 sacks. Tennessee's offensive line had a rating of 8.29, and they allowed 5 sacks. So neither quarterback was safe in this game. Pittsburgh converted 36% of their third down attempts. Tennessee 33%, so they're right close to each other. For Pittsburgh, quarterback Norris Brookshire was 25 of 40 for 308 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. So early on, he's kind of paid dividends for Pittsburgh. The 3-0, so that's important. But he's played pretty well so far. My boy, defensive tackle Quentin Smith, 2 tackles and 1.5 sacks, turning back the clock a little bit. And then cornerback Donovan Singleton Blake, who I believe is a rookie, 2 tackles, a pick, and a pass defended. And for Tennessee, quarterback Thomas Wheeler, 28 of 51 for 311 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks. He was harassed all game long. And I would imagine that the pressure kind of got to him, and that may have helped force those 2 picks. So the Pittsburgh pass rush was crucial, I think, in this win. Getting to Thomas Wheeler, getting him uncomfortable, making him make mistakes is always a good, avenue to beating him. And I think that's what Pittsburgh did this week. Cornerback Jordan Harris, who was the number 33 pick in 2020, was it? Kind of a guy that I think most people have kind of forgotten about. He had 3 tackles, a pick, and a pass defended. Defensive end Tyler Jones, 3 tackles, 2 tackles for a loss, and 2 sacks. Game note, Tennessee scored 28 points in the first 3 quarters, and then they were held scoreless in the fourth quarter, and Pittsburgh scored 8 in that fourth quarter to win the game. So great job by the Pittsburgh defense in the final 15 minutes to hold Tennessee scoreless. I picked this game because, as I mentioned before earlier in this podcast, AFC North as a whole is 11-1, and there's now 3 teams at 3-0 and a team at 2-1. And if you're Pittsburgh, you're seeing that and you're like, we've got to win. We have to win every game right now. I think Pittsburgh's probably had the toughest schedule, so for them to be 3-0. Maybe Cleveland. Cleveland's had a tough schedule too, I think, outside of San Francisco. So Pittsburgh's had a really tough schedule, so to be 3-0, I think that's really impressive. I think they have maybe one of the bigger question marks coming into the season at quarterback with Norris Brookshire. And having kind of never really worked out in Chicago. How is he going to handle being in Pittsburgh? And, he's kind of taken on the focal point of the offense. Even they have Chester Henson, who used to be really, really good, and really kind of isn't anymore, unfortunately. And for Tennessee, the loss doesn't kill you. You're a game back of Jacksonville. You're tied with Texans right into Houston. So you're still right in it, but this would have been a nice one to have because you got to think that Pittsburgh's another playoff caliber team. So being able to go on the road to a playoff caliber team early in the season, get the win, and would have been a nice, morale booster, confidence booster. But still, even if you're Tennessee, you think we gave up 5 sacks. We had 2 turnovers from our quarterback, who completed like 55% of his passes, and we lost by 6. So if I'm Tennessee, I'm thinking, it's not all bad. No, the loss doesn't. There's nuggets of positivity in that loss. Of course, no loss is good. I've said that before. That's certified true. No loss is good. But if I'm Tennessee, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, the loss, it's there, but we can learn from this, and what we can learn from is that we don't want to play Carlos Washington ever again. So really good game. I think this ended up being, if this game had been on TV in real life, definitely would have been a really, really fun game to watch. Except for the fourth quarter. Probably would have been really, really boring. Final segment, injuries. And this week I'm only including guys who are going to for sure miss game action. So and it's all chronological from beginning of the time from Thursday night through Monday night. So we'll start with the earliest guy I have here. I have New Orleans cornerback Alexis Stanford, who was the cornerback number 2, severe ACL rupture against the Rams, and he's out for the season. He's a 77 overall player. His replacement is cornerback Devin Little, who was an 80 overall. Again, there's cornerback number 2. I believe they still have George Brady, I think is the number 1 guy somehow. So we'll see how that does with the depth, because after Devin Little, I think it gets a little hazy in terms of reliability and talent. Denver's Todd Jennings also has a severe ACL rupture against the Bengals. That's going to kick him out until next year. His replacement immediately is quarterback Eric Jennings, who struggled in that one game. But again, no preparation as a starting quarterback. Give him a week or two and see what he does. But I think the Broncos have already started looking for quarterback options. So if you've got a quarterback you want to get rid of and you think Denver might be able to do ball with you, give him a call. Tennessee has 2 guys. My baby, running back Chad Dess, has a moderate shoulder dislocation. He'll miss 1 week, so he'll be back week 6 at the earliest. He's been replaced by Chris Bell, who we've all seen play for the last 3-4 years, so we kind of know what he isn't at this point, which is good. Tennessee's free safety Chad Walker had a severe Achilles rupture. That's going to end his season, unfortunately. So free safety Alex Collins will be his replacement. Alex Collins has been in the league for a long time. He's in his 9th year. So I think that means he was an original draftee. So he's plenty experienced. Not the highest rating is an 84, but I think that should give you at least a base level of talent at that position that I think you'll be fine. Pittsburgh's offensive tackle Giovanni Garrison, who himself is an injury replacement. He's a backup tackle who's now starting. Had a moderate quad pull against Tennessee. He's out a week. He'll be back week 6. His replacement is Maxwell Carmichael, a third-year player out of Clemson who was a 76 overall, playing right tackle. So no, it's 1 week, so I think you'll be fine if you're Pittsburgh. But that right tackle position is becoming more and more concerning. Pittsburgh's outside linebacker Charles Johnson, who I believe himself is an injured replacement, had a moderate shoulder rotator cuff injury. He's out 9 weeks, so I think that means he won't be able to come back until week 14. Looks like his replacement is outside linebacker Jack Durrance, who's a 6-year guy at LSU, who is a 76 overall, playing at the right outside linebacker position. So if I'm a Pittsburgh opponent, they're down both Charles Johnson and I think right now Patrick Murphy, who's the guy who replaced. I'm targeting those linebackers hard. Las Vegas defensive tackle Martin Gray had a moderate elbow fracture. He's gone for 4 weeks, so he'll be back week 9. His replacement is rookie Marlon Bailey out of Akron, who's a 79. Don't really know what he is, so that's a bit of a concern on Vegas. New England defensive end Joey Davis against Kansas City suffered a severe back hyperextension injury. He's out for just a week. He'll be back week 6, but I think that means now that both starting defensive ends for New England are hurt right now. Davis will be replaced by Clayton James, a 6-year player out of Mississippi State, who's a 74 overall. Green Bay suffering another injury. Tackle Quinn Bowman had a moderate elbow tendonitis issue pop up. He's out for just a week. So he'll be back. He'll be back week 6 most likely. His replacement is offensive tackle Paul Scott, who's a 6-year guy out of Kansas State, and he's an 80 overall and the right tackle. So for a week, I think Green Bay will be fine. The Jets, wide receiver Eli Austin, who they made a trade for in the offseason against Green Bay, has a severe shoulder dislocation, which I believe kicks him out for the whole season. And his replacement is, Adam Coles, Jelly Brain Man himself, 2nd-year guy out of Pitt, is an 81 overall, and will be playing the water 2 spot behind Paul Howell. So it's that I think they already had a wide receiver injury in the Jets, so their wide receiver core is getting very thin very quickly. The Texans have 2 guys on this list. First one is outside linebacker Richard Jones. Has a severe hamstring bruise. He's gone for 2 weeks. His replacement will be Andre Gassaway, a 6-year guy out of West Virginia who's a 75. And probably more importantly, kicker Riley McNeil, who's kind of been pretty good for them so far, has a severe groin pull. He's out 4 weeks. Probably won't be back until week 9 at the earliest. And right now they don't have a replacement, so they're probably going to be looking at free agency to try and find a warm body. Buffalo's outside linebacker Bryant Hernandez, Man-Bear Pig, severe back disc tear, which sounds painful, out for the season. His replacement is rookie Cyrus Paulson out of Ohio State. It's a 77. So Buffalo's quarterback is probable or questionable for a week. He'll probably play. Actually, if I was Buffalo, I probably wouldn't play him anyways. I just let Kamau play for a week and let Jones recover. But losing Brian Hernandez is really, really going to hurt, and I don't know that they can really, really weather his loss. So that's it. That's injury report. That's the whole episode. And as always, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Don't forget to smash that like button as hard as you possibly can. I think if you hit the like button as hard as physically possible, it counts for more likes. I think that's how that works. And don't forget to subscribe, to my YouTube channel. But don't do that. Don't subscribe to the YouTube channel. Just don't. I don't post anything, so don't do that. That's week 3 from around the NFLHC, and thank you for listening.